The customer knew more than she said. I barely slept after that shift. Every small sound outside my apartment kept pulling me awake because my brain would immediately picture that pale figure somewhere beyond the windows. By morning, exhaustion had started dulling the fear slightly, which honestly made the whole thing feel more embarrassing than terrifying. That changed the moment I checked the dashcam footage again in daylight. The figure was still there. Clearer now, somehow without rain reflecting across the screen. I paused the video several times trying to understand what I was looking at. The body proportions still seemed wrong. The arms hung too low. The posture looked stiff in the same unnatural way I remembered from the house-sitting incident years earlier. I almost deleted the footage entirely. Instead, around noon, I drove back to the neighborhood. Part of me wanted answers. Another part just needed confirmation that somebody else had seen it too. Daylight made the road feel far less threatening than it had the night before. Kids rode bikes through nearby driveways. Lawn sprinklers clicked softly across wet grass. The entire area looked painfully normal. The house itself still felt wrong. Even under sunlight, it seemed unusually dark compared to the homes around it. Most curtains remained shut, and the driveway stretched empty toward the trees behind the property. I parked near the mailbox and walked toward the house for the first time. About halfway up the driveway, the front door opened suddenly. A woman stepped outside before I could knock. She looked exhausted. Not normal tiredness either. The kind that settles into somebody after weeks without proper sleep. Her face looked pale beneath her eyes, and she kept glancing toward the yard while talking to me. "You came back," she said quietly. I nodded awkwardly and mentioned the messages from the night before. For a second I thought she might deny sending them, but instead her expression tightened immediately. "You saw it on your camera too, not a question." I remember standing there unsure how honest to be. Saying yes out loud suddenly made the entire situation feel ridiculous again. But before I could answer properly, she motioned toward the security cameras mounted around the property. "It started about a month ago," she said. Her voice stayed calm, but I could hear fear underneath it constantly, like somebody trying very hard not to sound frightened anymore because fear had already exhausted them completely. She explained the figure never approached the house directly while anyone was awake. According to her, it only appeared late at night after visitors left. Delivery drivers, neighbors, once even a repair technician. Always behind them, always near the road or tree line. "Oh, most people never notice it," she said quietly. I asked if she had called the police. She laughed once under her breath without humor. What would I even show them? That answer unsettled me more than I expected. The woman eventually admitted her cameras had captured the figure. Several times, clearly enough that she stopped reviewing footage after dark altogether. She refused to let me inside the house, but while speaking, she opened her phone briefly to show one recording. Only for a second. I wish she had not. The clip showed the inside of a garage at night, storage shelves, hanging tools. The camera faced toward the automatic garage door, and standing near the back wall was the same pale figure, motionless, facing directly toward the camera. I remember immediately noticing how tall it looked indoors. Its head nearly aligned with the hanging garage light overhead. The proportions looked even less human standing beside normal objects. Before I could study the clip longer, the woman locked her phone screen quickly and stepped backward toward the doorway. Then she said something I still think about sometimes. It gets closer every time somebody notices it. Story 1, ____, the clip I wasn't supposed to see. I still have the video saved on an old phone I refuse to throw away. I do not watch it anymore. I stopped doing that after the third or fourth time because I noticed something that made the entire thing feel worse than it already was. At first, the footage looks completely harmless. Grainy backyard camera quality, a dark porch, a weak motion light flickering against wet concrete. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing jumps out. The figure does not rush toward the house or wave at the camera or do anything people normally expect from scary footage online. It just stands there. It's completely still. The camera timestamp says it first appeared at 1:16 in the morning. The final frame where you can still see it is timestamped 3:09 a.m., almost 2 hours. The thing outside never moved once. That was the part I could never explain to anyone properly. This happened about 3 years ago when I agreed to house sit for a family friend named Carla while she visited her sister in another state. She only needed someone there for 4 nights, mostly to feed her dog, bring in packages, and make the house look occupied. It sounded easy, honestly kind of relaxing. Carla lived in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where every driveway looked identical and nobody stayed outside after dark. The kind of place where even hearing a car door slam late at night felt unusual. The first day there felt normal. I watched television in the living room, ordered takeout, and answered a few work emails before falling asleep on the downstairs couch. The dog, an old golden retriever named Max, stayed close to me most of the night. He was friendly, calm, and barely reacted to anything. Carla had warned me he was getting old and mostly slept through everything now. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed against the coffee table hard enough to wake me up. At first I thought it was an Amber Alert, or one of those severe weather notifications people ignore half asleep. I remember reaching for my phone without even opening my eyes fully. The room was dark except for the television menu glowing blue across the walls. Then I saw the notification. Back porch camera motion detected 3:12 a.m. I almost ignored it. The house had motion cameras on every side because Carla traveled often and liked checking the property from her phone. She had connected the alerts to mine while she was away. Earlier that evening, I had already triggered 2 notifications myself taking trash outside. But something about waking up suddenly to that message made me uneasy immediately. It's maybe because the house was so quiet. It's maybe because Max was awake. I remember noticing him standing near the hallway entrance instead of sleeping beside the couch. His ears were raised slightly, but he was not barking. That bothered me more than barking would have. He just stood there staring toward the back of the house. I opened the camera app. The live feed showed the porch first. Patio furniture covered with plastic because rain was expected overnight. Nothing unusual. Then the motion clip loaded. At first I honestly thought the app had frozen. The figure blended into the darkness so perfectly that my brain did not register it immediately. It was standing near the fence at the very edge of the camera frame. Tall, thin, facing directly toward the house, not moving. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to understand what I was seeing. And then I noticed the head, tilted slightly sideways, like it was looking back at the camera. What scared me later was realizing the motion alert had not activated because the figure walked into frame. It activated because after standing still for hours, something about it finally moved. The house was too quiet. I kept replaying the clip, expecting the figure to move normally the second or third time I watched it. Some part of my brain wanted a simple explanation. Maybe someone drunk wandered into the yard. Maybe the camera quality distorted the image. Maybe it was just a neighbor standing outside smoking or looking for a lost dog. But every time the footage restarted, the same uncomfortable feeling came back. The thing near the fence looked wrong in a way I could not describe clearly. Its posture seemed too stiff, almost posed. Even stranger, the camera timestamp kept moving while the figure stayed completely frozen. I remember staring at the tiny numbers changing in the corner of the screen just to reassure myself the video had not paused. Behind me, Max let out a low whine. That immediately put me on edge because Carla told me he almost never made noise anymore. It was old, lazy, and usually impossible to wake up. But now, he stood near the hallway entrance with his eyes fixed toward the kitchen. I called his name softly, did not react. The back door was connected to the kitchen, separated only by a short hallway and a laundry room. From where I sat on the couch, I could not actually see the door itself, only darkness leading toward it. The entire house suddenly felt much larger than it had earlier that evening. I checked the live camera again. Nothing. The porch looked empty. Rainwater reflected the motion light in pale yellow streaks across the concrete, but the figure was gone completely. I remember feeling relieved for maybe 3 seconds before the porch light flickered once. Then again, not a normal flicker either. It only dimmed for a split second, almost like somebody briefly stepped in front of it. The motion icon appeared in the corner of the app. My stomach tightened immediately. I switched back to the recorded clip section, waiting for a new video to load. But nothing appeared. According to the camera, motion had been detected again, yet no new footage existed. I refreshed the app twice, thinking the system lagged because the cameras were old. Still nothing. That was when I heard the tapping sound. It's very soft. 3 small taps somewhere near the back of the house. At first I thought branches were hitting a window because rain had started outside, but the rhythm sounded too controlled, not random. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence again. I stayed frozen on the couch, listening harder than I probably ever had in my life. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen. Rain ticked against the gutters outside. Beyond that, nothing. The neighborhood itself felt dead. No passing cars, no distant televisions through windows, no dogs barking. Even the silence outside sounded heavy somehow, like the entire street had emptied without me noticing. I finally stood up and walked halfway down the hallway before stopping near the laundry room entrance. Max refused to follow me. He stayed behind near the living room, staring in my direction anxiously. I remember laughing nervously at myself because I knew how ridiculous the situation sounded. A strange camera clip, some tapping noises, a nervous dog. None of that actually meant danger. But I still could not make myself walk all the way to the back door. Instead, I pulled out my phone again and opened the live feed one more time, fully expecting the porch to be empty. For a second, it was. Then the motion light flickered again directly outside the kitchen door. It didn't walk like a person. I do not remember deciding to step backward. 1 second I was standing in the hallway staring at my phone screen, and the next I realized I had slowly moved back toward the living room without even noticing. Every instinct in my body wanted distance from the back door. The motion light outside flickered again, then stabilized into a dull yellow glow across the porch. The camera feed still looked empty. I kept staring anyway. The image quality on Carla's security system was terrible at night. Everything beyond the porch blurred together into dark shapes and static. Rain drifted across the screen in thin silver lines. I remember thinking the motion alert probably came from tree branches moving in the wind. Then something crossed the yard. At first, I honestly thought the video skipped frames. The figure appeared near the fence line again, but this time, it was moving slowly toward the house, not directly. It drifted sideways across the grass, almost carefully, like somebody trying not to make noise. The movement should have looked normal, but something about it immediately made my stomach tighten. It did not walk correctly. That sounds stupid when I say it out loud because obviously it was walking. Its legs moved, its body shifted forward. But the motion felt too smooth somehow, almost gliding. There was no bounce to the steps, no natural change in posture. It looked less like a person crossing a yard and more like something being pulled forward quietly through the dark. I crouched beside the couch trying to steady my hands enough to zoom in on the footage. The camera sharpened slightly. That made everything worse. The figure looked tall and painfully thin beneath soaking wet clothes that clung tightly against its body. Its arms hung unusually low, nearly reaching the middle of its thighs. I remember focusing on that detail immediately because proportions like that looked unnatural on a normal person. Max suddenly barked behind me. It was the first loud sound he had made all night, and it scared me badly enough that I nearly dropped my phone. His bark was not aggressive either. It sounded panicked, sharp, warning me instead of warning whatever stood outside. The figure stopped moving, not gradually. One frame it drifted forward across the yard, and the next it stood completely still, facing the house again. I felt cold immediately after that. There is something deeply wrong about watching motion stop too perfectly. Real people shift their weight, they breathe, even standing still. The body continues making tiny, unconscious movements. But this thing froze so suddenly it almost looked edited. The porch light flickered once more. The figure moved again. This time it walked directly toward the back door. Every part of me expected it to try the handle or bang against the glass. I even caught myself looking down the hallway expecting to hear footsteps outside. But when the figure reached the porch, it did none of those things. It simply stood there, listening. That is honestly the only way I can describe it. The camera angle showed the side of its body now, its head tilted slowly downward until it hovered near the kitchen door window, not touching the glass. It was close enough that it looked like it was trying to hear something inside the house. I stopped breathing for a moment, because suddenly I became aware of every tiny sound I had made since waking up. The television. My footsteps in the hallway. Max whining near the couch. It knew someone was inside. The worst part was realizing it had probably known the entire time. I stared at the screen, waiting for the figure to react somehow, but it remained completely motionless beside the door. Rain slid across its shoulders. The porch light buzzed softly overhead. Then, very quietly, 3 taps came from the other side of the kitchen door. Max backed away into the living room with his tail tucked beneath him, and for the first time that night, I considered calling the police. Even though terrified part of me knew I would never explain what I was seeing outside, the missing minutes I never called the police. People always say they would in situations like this. But fear does strange things to your thinking when you are alone in the middle of the night. Part of me worried I was overreacting to shadows and bad camera quality. Another part of me was terrified that if officers arrived and found nothing outside, I would have to stay in that house afterward knowing I had imagined the entire thing. So instead, I kept watching the footage. The figure remained near the back door for almost 4 minutes without moving. Its head stayed lowered, toward the glass exactly the same way the entire time, as though it was listening carefully to sounds inside the kitchen. Rainwater streamed down the porch light above it, occasionally distorting the shape of its body across the camera feed. Then the video skipped. Not visually. The timestamp jumped forward from 3:18 to 3:25 instantly. First I thought I accidentally touched the screen, but when I replayed the footage again, the same thing happened. 7 full minutes were missing from the recording. The camera feed resumed, showing an empty porch with rain blowing sideways across the yard. The figure was simply gone. I checked the clip 3 more times, trying to understand it. Nothing. No transition. No recording error message. Just 7 missing minutes in the middle of the night. That was the moment the fear changed for me. Until then, whatever stood outside still felt separate from the house. Distant, confined to the camera screen in my hands. But missing time creates a different kind of panic because your mind immediately starts filling those empty spaces with possibilities. I realized suddenly that the house itself felt different. Small things, subtle things. I could not fully explain at first. The hallway closet beside the laundry room stood slightly open now. I knew it had been closed earlier because I remembered leaning against it while checking the camera feed. One of Carla's framed family photos on the wall had also been turned face down on the table beneath it. I froze, staring at that picture for several seconds. I had definitely not touched it. The silence inside the house felt heavier now too, almost watchful somehow. Even the rain outside seemed quieter than before. "Max," I called softly. No response. A cold feeling spread through my chest immediately, because the dog had not made a sound for several minutes. I walked back toward the living room, expecting to see him near the couch again, but he was gone completely. That scared me more than the figure outside. I searched the downstairs rooms quickly, before finally finding him upstairs beneath Carla's bed. He was pushed so far against the wall that only his eyes reflected faintly in the darkness. I had never seen a dog hide like that before. When I reached toward him gently, he flinched away from my hand. That was when I finally called Carla. She answered on the second ring in my imagination. In reality, the call went straight to voicemail. I remember whispering into the phone instead of speaking normally because somehow talking loudly felt dangerous. "Hey, Carla. Something weird is happening here. Call me back when you wake up." I almost mentioned the figure outside. I almost mentioned the missing footage. But hearing how nervous my own voice sounded embarrassed me suddenly, so I ended the message early. Then I looked toward the upstairs hallway. The guest bedroom door at the far end was open now too. I was absolutely certain it had been closed before. From downstairs, somewhere near the kitchen, I heard a dull creak travel across the floorboards beneath me. Not footsteps exactly, more like pressure settling against old wood. Max buried his face deeper beneath the bed. I suddenly understood why the house had felt wrong. Story 2. The delivery camera a few years after the house-sitting incident. I started working late-night food deliveries to make extra money after my regular job. Most shifts were boring. Quiet roads, empty apartment complexes, drunk college students forgetting to answer their phones. The only interesting part sometimes was seeing what people's security cameras picked up while I dropped food at their doors. You notice strange things doing that kind of work long enough. People arguing through windows, somebody standing motionless in a garage, dogs staring into dark yards at nothing you can see. Usually there was a simple explanation for all of it once you thought about it long enough. Usually there was one house, though that stayed with me. The first order I delivered there came around midnight during heavy rain. The address sat near the edge of town where neighborhoods became more isolated and houses spread farther apart. Long driveways, fewer streetlights. Large patches of woods separating properties from each other. The delivery instructions immediately stood out. Leave food at the end of the driveway. Do not walk to the house. At first I assumed maybe they had aggressive dogs or sleeping kids inside. Weird instructions were common at night, so I did not think much about it. I left the bag beside the mailbox, took the delivery photo, and drove away. Then I got another order there the next week. Same instructions. Again the week after that. Eventually I became curious enough to pay attention to the property itself. The house sat far back from the road, mostly hidden behind trees. Even during daylight deliveries later on, I never got a clear look at it. The porch lights were always off, curtains always closed. The strangest part was the cameras. There were several mounted around the property. But unlike normal doorbell cameras, every single one faced outward toward the yard or road instead of toward the house itself. I remember noticing that immediately because it felt backwards somehow. One rainy night around 1 in the morning, I received another delivery for the same address. The roads were empty by then, and the weather had turned bad enough that visibility kept fading beneath the windshield wipers. I pulled beside the mailbox, grabbed the food, and left it exactly where the instructions requested. The entire time, I felt oddly exposed standing there. The woods surrounding the property looked almost black against the rain. No insects, no distant traffic. It's just water hitting pavement and tree branches creaking softly somewhere farther back in the darkness. I hurried back toward my car afterward, feeling stupidly nervous for no real reason. Then my phone buzzed before I even reached the driver's seat. Came message from the customer. "Did you see the person behind you?" I stopped moving immediately. I turned around fast enough that rainwater sprayed off my hooded jacket. The driveway behind me was empty. The mailbox stood crooked beside the road exactly where I had left it. Beyond that, only darkness and trees. I actually laughed once under my breath because I assumed the customer was messing with me. Then another message appeared. "Check your camera." I drove nearly half a mile away before pulling over. My car had an old dash cam attached to the windshield because too many delivery drivers got blamed for accidents that were not their fault. I opened the footage while sitting beneath a flickering gas station light, trying not to feel unsettled by how fast my heartbeat suddenly sounded inside the car. At first the recording looked normal. Rain, dark road, me carrying the food toward the mailbox. Then, near the edge of the frame behind me, something pale stood beside the trees near the driveway entrance, completely motionless, watching me the entire time. It followed the car. I replayed the footage 4 or 5 times sitting in that gas station parking lot. Every time, the same shape appeared near the trees behind me. Tall, pale, standing completely still beside the driveway entrance, while I walked back toward my car, unaware it was there. The worst part was how easy it would have been to miss. The figure never stepped fully into view. Most of its body blended into the darkness behind the mailbox and tree line. The dashcam quality had been slightly worse. I probably would have convinced myself it was rain distortion or headlights reflecting strangely through the storm. But it was there, watching me. I checked the timestamp, carefully trying to calm myself down with logic. The figure appeared for maybe 6 seconds before vanishing once I entered the driver's seat. Remember thinking maybe it was just another delivery driver standing near the road. Maybe somebody lived nearby and happened to be outside. Then I noticed something strange. The shape never moved naturally. Not once. The entire 6 seconds looked almost identical, frame by frame, except for the rain shifting around it. No breathing. No posture adjustment, nothing. I suddenly understood why the customer asked. If I had seen the person behind me instead of simply warning me earlier, whatever they saw on their own cameras probably looked just as wrong. I should have ended my shift after that. Honestly, that would have been the smart decision. But once enough time passes without something directly harming you, your brain starts searching for explanations again. I convinced myself exhaustion and bad weather were making me paranoid. I even laughed quietly at myself while pulling back onto the road. That feeling lasted maybe 3 minutes. The neighborhood beyond the customer's property was unusually dark. Most houses sat far apart with long stretches of empty road between them. Rain drifted constantly through my headlights, and the windshield wipers squeaked every few seconds across the glass. I remember checking my mirrors more often than normal without fully realizing I was doing it. Nothing was behind me. No headlights, no cars, no movement anywhere. Even the GPS on my dashboard started acting strangely. The map froze twice within the same mile, forcing the route to reload itself. At one point, the voice navigation repeated the same direction 3 times in a row, despite the road being completely straight. I kept driving anyway. Then I glanced at the dashcam display. Most people do not realize dashcams often show a small live reflection feed while recording. Mine displayed a tiny rear-facing window in the corner of the screen, connected to the back camera, and something moved through it. I jerked my eyes toward the actual rearview mirror immediately. Nothing. Empty road. But when I looked back at the dashcam screen, the pale figure appeared again farther down the road behind my car, moving, not running. That was the part that truly scared me. The figure drifted forward at a pace that should have been impossible without sprinting, yet its body barely changed position at all. The movement looked smooth in the same unnatural way it had near the mailbox, almost gliding, like the road itself pulled it forward silently through the rain. I stared directly into the mirror again. Nothing there. Back to the screen. The figure remained visible. Closer now. I remember feeling my chest tighten hard enough that breathing suddenly felt difficult. Every instinct told me not to look at the rear camera anymore. Wait, to God. I could not stop checking it every few seconds. Mirror. Nothing. Screen. Closer. Mirror. Nothing. Screen. Closer again. At one point, I actually accelerated hard enough that my tires slipped slightly on the wet pavement. The speedometer climbed past roads I normally drove carefully because visibility had become terrible by then. Still, the rear camera showed the figure behind me, never running, never changing expression. Just gaining distance slowly through the rain, while the empty road behind my car remained completely clear whenever I looked with my own eyes. Then the GPS screen went black entirely. For about 3 seconds, every light inside the dashboard flickered off at once. And during those 3 seconds, something knocked softly against the rear window of the car behind me from outside. The customer knew more than she said. I barely slept after that shift. Every small sound outside my apartment kept pulling me awake because my brain would immediately picture that pale figure somewhere beyond the windows. By morning, exhaustion had started dulling the fear slightly, which honestly made the whole thing feel more embarrassing than terrifying. That changed the moment I checked the dashcam footage again in daylight. The figure was still there. Clearer now, somehow without rain reflecting across the screen. I paused the video several times trying to understand what I was looking at. The body proportions still seemed wrong. The arms hung too low. The posture looked stiff in the same unnatural way I remembered from the house-sitting incident years earlier. I almost deleted the footage entirely. Instead, around noon, I drove back to the neighborhood. Part of me wanted answers. Another part just needed confirmation that somebody else had seen it too. Daylight made the road feel far less threatening than it had the night before. Kids rode bikes through nearby driveways. Lawn sprinklers clicked softly across wet grass. The entire area looked painfully normal. The house itself still felt wrong. Even under sunlight, it seemed unusually dark compared to the homes around it. Most curtains remained shut, and the driveway stretched empty toward the trees behind the property. I parked near the mailbox and walked toward the house for the first time. About halfway up the driveway, the front door opened suddenly. A woman stepped outside before I could knock. She looked exhausted. Not normal tiredness either. The kind that settles into somebody after weeks without proper sleep. Her face looked pale beneath her eyes, and she kept glancing toward the yard while talking to me. "You came back," she said quietly. I nodded awkwardly and mentioned the messages from the night before. For a second I thought she might deny sending them, but instead her expression tightened immediately. "You saw it on your camera too, not a question." I remember standing there unsure how honest to be. Saying yes out loud suddenly made the entire situation feel ridiculous again. But before I could answer properly, she motioned toward the security cameras mounted around the property. "It started about a month ago," she said. Her voice stayed calm, but I could hear fear underneath it constantly. Like somebody trying very hard not to sound frightened anymore because fear had already exhausted them completely. She explained the figure never approached the house directly while anyone was awake. According to her, it only appeared late at night after visitors left. Delivery drivers, neighbors, once even a repair technician. Always behind them, always near the road or tree line. "Oh, most people never notice it," she said quietly. I asked if she had called the police. She laughed once under her breath without humor. What would I even show them? That answer unsettled me more than I expected. The woman eventually admitted her cameras had captured the figure. Several times, clearly enough that she stopped reviewing footage after dark altogether. She refused to let me inside the house, but while speaking, she opened her phone briefly to show one recording. Only for a second. I wish she had not. The clip showed the inside of a garage at night, storage shelves, hanging tools. The camera faced toward the automatic garage door, and standing near the back wall was the same pale figure, motionless, facing directly toward the camera. I remember immediately noticing how tall it looked indoors. Its head nearly aligned with the hanging garage light overhead. The proportions looked even less human standing beside normal objects. Before I could study the clip longer, the woman locked her phone screen quickly and stepped backward toward the doorway. Then she said something I still think about sometimes. It gets closer every time somebody notices it. Story 3, the farm camera, the last story, happened only 8 months ago. After everything with the security cameras and the delivery route, stop telling people about experiences like that because nobody reacts normally when you describe something you cannot explain properly. Either they laugh or they become too interested in exactly the wrong way. So when my uncle called asking if I could help him check trail cameras on his farm one weekend, I never mentioned any of the earlier incidents. My uncle owned several acres of farmland, surrounded by woods and uneven hills about 2 hours outside the city, mostly cattle and a few horses. Quiet area. No nearby neighbors except another farm almost a mile down the road. I used to visit there constantly as a kid, so the property always felt familiar to me. The problem started with the animals. My uncle said the horses had been refusing to enter the north field after dark. Few cows also kept gathering near the fence line every night, staring toward the woods, instead of returning to the barn normally. At first he assumed coyotes were moving through the area, which happened occasionally during colder months. Then one of the trail cameras disappeared. Not stolen exactly. The strap had been cut cleanly, but the camera itself was left sitting face down in the mud nearby with the battery removed. My uncle mostly wanted help checking the remaining cameras because he suspected hunters or trespassers were crossing the property at night. We spent most of Saturday reviewing footage inside his kitchen. At first, the clips showed nothing unusual. Deer wandering through fields, raccoons near the fences, one blurry coyote passing across a creek around midnight. The cameras activated constantly because of moving branches and wildlife. Then we opened footage from the north field. The first clip looked completely normal. 3 deer stood near the edge of the woods, feeding quietly beneath the trees. The timestamp showed around 2:13 in the morning. Nothing moved except tall grass shifting in the wind. Then all 3 deer suddenly stopped eating at the exact same moment. Not startled, frozen. Every animal turned slowly toward the tree line deeper inside the woods. I remember laughing quietly at first because the reaction looked strange enough to feel staged somehow. The deer remained perfectly still for nearly 30 seconds without running away. Even their ears stayed pointed forward identically, focused on something outside the camera frame. Then my uncle paused the footage. "Back there," he said softly. At first I could not see what he meant. The camera quality was terrible at night, and most of the background blurred into dark shapes between tree trunks. But once he pointed toward the left side of the frame, I noticed something standing farther back in the woods, partially hidden behind the trees. Tall, too tall. Only part of its body was visible, but something about the proportions immediately felt wrong enough that I leaned closer to the screen instinctively. The shape blended almost perfectly with the darkness around it, except for one pale section near where the face should have been. I replayed the footage again and again. Every time my eyes kept returning to the same detail. The thing between the trees did not move once. The deer eventually bolted away suddenly all at once, vanishing from the frame in panic. But whatever stood behind them remained completely still, watching the camera from the woods beyond the field. The camera turned around. My uncle tried explaining the figure away for almost an hour afterward. He said it was probably another hunter standing deep in the woods, or maybe a tree stump distorted by shadows and poor camera quality. I could tell he did not fully believe his own explanations, though. Every time the footage replayed, he became quieter. Eventually, he stood up and grabbed his coat. "We're checking that camera," he said. The north field sat several minutes from the farmhouse by truck. During daylight, the property looked completely ordinary again. Wind moved through tall grass. Birds circled above the fences. The woods surrounding the field seemed thinner and less threatening than they had in the footage the night before. Still, neither of us talked much during the drive. The camera itself had been strapped to a thick tree overlooking the field near the woods. My uncle installed it there months earlier to track coyotes moving across the property after dark. The moment we reached the tree line, something immediately felt wrong. The camera was no longer facing the field. It had been turned completely around. Now the lens pointed back toward the farmhouse, nearly 300 yards away across open grass. At first I assumed my uncle moved it himself and forgot, but the expression on his face told me otherwise instantly. He walked directly to the tree and checked the strap carefully without speaking. Oh, it was tight, he muttered finally. The strap still looked intact too. No cuts, no loose buckles. Yet the entire camera had somehow rotated backward around the trunk without damaging anything holding it in place. I remember looking across the field toward the farmhouse windows, then feeling a sudden wave of discomfort so strong it made my stomach tighten. From that angle, the camera pointed directly toward the upstairs bedroom where I had slept the night before. My uncle removed the memory card without another word, and we returned to the house immediately afterward. Neither of us wanted to stand near those woods longer than necessary anymore. The final recording on the camera lasted only 23 seconds. At first, the screen showed normal nighttime footage of the field. The wind moved softly through the grass while insects flickered occasionally across the lens. The timestamp read 3:11 a.m., then the camera jerked violently sideways, not enough to fall. It's just enough to shake the frame hard several times, like something grabbed the tree itself. My uncle paused the footage there immediately, but I asked him to continue. The next few seconds still bother me more than anything else I have seen. A hand entered the frame slowly from the left side, pale, too long. The fingers looked unnaturally thin as they wrapped around the side of the camera casing carefully, not aggressively, almost gently. The footage tilted upward slightly as the hand adjusted the lens. Then very slowly, the camera turned away from the woods. Not random movement either, intentional, deliberate. The frame rotated carefully across the dark field until the farmhouse appeared in the distance beneath the night sky. The camera continued adjusting itself little by little until the upstairs bedroom window sat directly in the center of the screen. My bedroom window. The hand disappeared afterward. The recording continued another several seconds, pointed perfectly toward the house. Nothing moved outside. No animals crossed the field. The entire property looked silent and empty. Then the upstairs bedroom light switched on inside the footage, because that was the exact moment I woke up during the night to use the bathroom without realizing something out near the woods was already watching the window waiting for movement. That realization changed everything for me. Until then, I always assumed those things avoided cameras. After the farm footage, I understood something far worse. Sometimes they wanted to be seen. I still checked the footage. Nothing was ever explained after that. No police reports. No missing persons cases connected to any of the incidents. No clear footage showing an identifiable face. Every clip always looked just uncertain enough that another explanation could exist if somebody wanted one badly enough. That is the part people do not understand when they ask why these experiences stayed with me for so long. Oh. It was never one single terrifying moment. It was the pattern. It's the same unnatural stillness. The same feeling of being watched before noticing anything unusual. The same impossible movement across different places years apart. Even now, I still catch myself replaying old footage late at night, searching for details I missed before. Sometimes I convince myself the figure probably was human after all. Somebody trespassing? Somebody mentally ill wandering through properties unnoticed? But then I remembered the missing 7 minutes at Carla's house. I remembered the thing behind my car moving closer without appearing in the mirrors. I remember the hand turning that trail camera carefully toward my bedroom window like somebody adjusting a photograph. And suddenly, none of those explanations feel convincing anymore. My uncle stopped using trail cameras entirely after that weekend. The woman from the delivery route moved away about 4 months later, according to another driver who knew the address. The house sat empty for a long time afterward. Every now and then, I still think about driving past it again, just to see whether the cameras remain mounted around the property, facing outward, toward the road. I never do. As for me, I still keep cameras outside my apartment now. It's a front door camera, parking lot camera, even one facing the hallway outside my unit. For a while, having them made me feel safer, like I had proof that nothing strange was happening around me while I slept. But eventually I realized Cameras do not really protect you from anything. They only record what was already there. That changes the way you think after enough time passes. Sometimes when I cannot sleep, I open the live feeds on my phone and check outside without any real reason. Most nights, everything looks normal. Empty hallway, quiet parking lot, nobody outside the building. Still, I keep checking, because once you have seen something standing perfectly still in the dark long enough, you start understanding how easy it would be to miss it completely. That is probably the worst part of all this. Not the footage itself, not the strange movement, no, not even the feeling that something was following me. It is realizing every single time I saw those things on camera, they had already been nearby long before I noticed them. And sometimes I still wonder how often that happens without any camera recording it at all. Especially on nights when the motion notification appears briefly on my phone before disappearing again with no saved clip attached.